Lena, pronouns she, her. I'm an outreach engagement specialist at the City of Seattle Office of Labor Standards, also known as OLS. Our office is responsible for enforcing Seattle labor standards ordinances to protect workers and educate employers on their responsibilities, including the Domestic Workers Ordinance, which took effect July of 2019.
Hi there, my name is Jasmine Marwaha. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a policy analyst with the Office of Labor Standards.
Hi, I'm Dana Barnett. I work for an organization called Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. We support employers of nannies, house cleaners, gardeners, and other household workers in having fair and ethical practices in your home and supporting the rights of workers.
My name is Doris Garcia. A Fair Work Center and Work in Washington are organizations that work hard to provide support for workers and their work. And we have been working with domestic workers for almost 3 years. Personally, myself, I'm a former nanny, and I am really proud to keep advocating for workers' rights. So thank you for having me here and having us here together. And my pronouns are she, her, ella.
The law applies to nannies and house cleaners, home care workers, gardeners, cooks, and household managers. It's a good list, but there are certain types of domestic workers that are excluded from coverage, and that includes workers who work on a casual basis. And so casual basis refers to work that's kind of irregular or uncertain or kind of just incidental. And it's also different in nature from the type of paid work that the worker normally does. The worker is presumed to be not a casual worker, not working on a casual basis, unless they disclose voluntarily to a household or hiring entity that this is just casual or sort of something they normally don't do. An example would be, someone cleans a family's house about once every 2 weeks, a house cleaner. Or maybe every 3 weeks, or maybe the day and time changes depending on the household's needs. Now, to the household, that may appear casual, but to the worker, they rely on that income from cleaning houses, even if it's part-time. If they feel like this is something that they rely on and this is the work that they do for their regular paid work, then that is not a casual basis. That worker would be covered under the Domestic Workers Ordinance and would be entitled to minimum wage, currently $16.69 an hour, and breaks and all the other rights that Jennifer mentioned before.
Yes, I myself also am sometimes an employer of babysitters, nannies, and I work primarily with employers. And we've recently surveyed over 100 employers. And one of the main questions that came up really is whether or not the people they employ fall under the ordinance, exactly because of what Jasmine was raising, that they feel that they hire them on a casual basis. So they might only hire even once or twice a year if it's a gardener, or even for cleaners, maybe once a month, maybe irregularly. And so they feel that for them, it's casual. And so they don't really think of themselves as employers. I think another thing that comes up a lot is with babysitters and nannies. And Jasmine, I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit too. Like, what if someone's hiring a teenager? What if they're hiring a college student?
You know, I think there are definitely going to be gray areas, but what we tell folks is let's just assume that the person is not casual, that they rely on this income. And even if they're teenagers or college students, that they still work. There are lots of young people who work and who rely on income. And we don't know everyone's circumstances. It could be that the worker, the babysitter, does voluntarily disclose, like, oh, I don't, sure, I'll do you a favor. I don't normally do this, or they could even voluntarily kind of talk about what they how they perceive themselves in this work. But I would say that it's safest to assume that babysitters are covered under the ordinance.
Part of the reason I think why there's a lot of confusion is also because of the way in which we have racialized gender and gender, related to this work, because we think of this work in many ways as not real work. And so I think that's also part of why sometimes people think of it as casual and not being able to fall under this basis is because, and so part of this is really to uplift the idea that the true idea that this is work.
I appreciate what Dana said about, considering this as a baseline, because it's really important for employers that really understand that this is a real industry, and that the fact there is an ordinance, it's not just for them to have a guidance, but also to see it as a baseline and not just, what they should be just doing. I think domestic workers recently, usually have a hard time advocating for themselves, right? Usually workers are people that look like me, women of color, immigrant workers, where English is their second language. So I think one of their main struggles when approaching employers, hiring entities is, those are involved, like the fact that there is an this is English as their second language, the cultural differences. And I think it is important for employers to understand that and to be, kind and mindful of those things, and try to kind of jump out those barriers a little and come closer to the employer and really meeting their needs, and not just offering what that baseline is, right? Like, I've heard a lot of workers that have come, or I've heard from workers that they struggle going to their employers because they are afraid that they're going to say no, and then they're going to start like frictions between them, and then they're going to lose their job. So rather than advocating for themselves and come and ask for the base, the minimum, or above that, they prefer stay where they are, how they are, and where they are, like continuing living those experiences, or continue living, and receiving less than what they deserve, because we appreciate so much our work and our employers that we'd rather stay in there and be working with them rather, than jeopardizing that for coming forward. But I do try to encourage workers to go and talk to them, because one of the things I've always said to them is like, as they tend to be someone's employees too. They know how a labor relationship is, right? So coming from that understanding, you can see each other as more like peers and be a little bit more confident and asking for what you want and what you deserve. and I don't know if I'm going a little bit on like the tangents of this topic, but I think it's very important that employers specifically meet them halfway or even further, right? Because of all of these barriers that they can face. And I think having a clear, open communication with workers, it's very important, right? Because like even so, for someone like you were mentioning, the casual basis for someone in a household can look like, oh, I just see my nanny once a week. I just see my babysitter once a week. Because they're coming to do date nights. You know, I myself in the past, I went to do a lot of date nights because you know, you guys just need that break. You know, as parents, we know that you need that mind, you know, sane break and heart of, you know, all of those. It's very important for you guys to do the best you can in your parenthood and your parenting experience and journey. So, you know, when I was coming to do those regular even babysitting for families, you know, they could think like, oh, well, for her, it's probably just a casual thing. But I was relying those on that income, right? I probably had like 4 different families that I was babysitting throughout like the week, maybe during the weekend, you know. And I think it is important that you realize that if your employer, if someone that is coming to your house is depending on that income to survive, to live, you know, decent life and be able to, you know, pay in this expensive city all your needs and so on. I think is it's very important that their employers recognize that and are um, very mindful of that situation. That even if it's just once a week for you, it doesn't mean that for that worker is a casual base. You gotta recognize that as, you know, always believe that is their main source of income, right? And as much as employers rely on their income to be consistent from their work, it's the same for us, right? And I've heard many nannies that haven't, you know, well, this family didn't pay me the full amount they owed me, you know, and that I probably that is a different conversation to have, but you know, like it's very important to be mindful of that. And if your employer is, excuse me, if your employee is dependent of this, you know, you gotta be consistent with them, and that means that they're, you know, workers and that serve all their rights. I think the most responsibility that employer can take, the hiring entity can take, it makes their life easier for the employee and the relationship to be hopefully better and more cordial and in a better communication. I think that it's very beneficial for the relationship when the employer knows what their obligations are and what are the things that they need to provide for their workers. So I think that will be, you know, my last like kind of add to this conversation around that. I think it's the more people responsibilize this on their role in this relationship, the better for that relationship. So it's I would love to see more employers really feeling like they are employers and acting like they're employers. I'd love to see great relationships with employers and families, and myself, I've still continue to have great relationships with former employers. And you know, for me, that will be the standard for this kind of relationship, employee employer, and in our industry. You know, hopefully one day this is actually spread out around all the industry or the whole industry, and we can elevate this rights and their lives and voices and lifestyle. So that's kind of my last addition to it.
Just recognizing that if you have somebody coming in your home to do work, then you're their employer. There's some kind of guilt and shame that is sometimes associated with hiring people. And also sometimes it feels like, oh, well, I'm not a rich person. I don't want to associate with that. I don't want to associate with this idea that I'm like a boss or that I have this privilege. So I think there's a lot. I know I'm getting into like pretty deep emotional things. that maybe we could all use therapy for, but I think it's all there for all of us. I know I go through that too, where it's hard to first to even admit, oh, I need that kind of help, and what does that say about me? And then to be public and acknowledge, like, that means I'm an employer, I'm employing somebody, you know, to do this work.
So I'm really glad you said that, Dana, because I think that, you know, people think that talking specifics about wages and breaks and like really outlining the parameters of work kind of breaks this bubble of like, oh, they're just helping me. And this gets into another exception, which I don't want to open a can of worms, but there's also another exception for coverage, which is family relationships. And I've talked to a lot of households who are like, oh, but they're like family, you know? And it's like, no, family relationship is really narrowly construed, which we can get into in, you know, if we have time. But I think it's this idea, like you said, that people don't want to see themselves as the boss, or they maybe don't want to see themselves as like an employer, or in this case, a hiring entity, which could also mean technically an independent contractor relationship. But it's like basically if you are controlling the conditions of work, if they are if a worker is performing work in your home, for the, you know, for the most part, you know, you do have to have conversations about wages and breaks and other conditions of work. And that doesn't mean that the relationship is any less friendly or any less meaningful, you know, for you or that worker necessarily. It just means that you're being really clear about, how what the expectations are, and if anything, that can actually provide a more richer and deeper personal relationship when you have that clarity to rely on.
And just to honor that conversation, we'll create a separate space for that because it deserves its own space. It is a really, really, just another big conversation to get into.
Yeah, so one thing to add, which weaves into Hand in Hand's role and how we can support employers, is that, you know, part of it too, it's so multifaceted. Part of it too is, I know, like when I was first hiring a nanny for my baby, I had never done that before. So I actually thought the nanny I hired was more experienced than me. And so I think part of it is that we don't have HR in our homes. We're not trained as employers, you know, to be anyone's boss or manager. And so there's a lot of things that are awkward and uncomfortable also just because we don't really have the resources or the experience. And so that's also something that Hand in Hand recognizes and provides. We have a lot of different material. You know, you can reach out to me, you can look at our website. We have checklists to help you think about things. You know, I know for me going through the checklist, there were a lot of things on there that I hadn't even considered, and they were great and really helpful for me as an employer to make a good relationship in my home. And so Hand in Hand, we support employers in that way. And we also organize around domestic worker rights and affordable care and dignity and care for all, because we recognize that this is actually, we're interconnected, that this is not just about doing right for someone else, but it's also about something that intimately is connected to us. We all deserve dignified care and we all deserve dignified work. And so, and those things are not in competition with each other, they're actually aligned with one another. And so that's our belief at Hand in Hand. So if you want to get involved in supporting campaigns locally for workers' rights or to raise standards, you know, you can contact us, you can join us. It's a membership organization. You can join as a member. And if you want resources and support in your own home, that's also something we can provide. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you for the space. Thank you for having us here. And yeah, again, my name is Doris Garcia with Fair Work Center and Work in Washington. And we are here to support workers with any legal consultation. We also can help you learn your rights and advocate for your needs at work. And please contact us either at fairworkcenter.org or Work in Washington or workingwa.org, and my email is Doris, DORIS, at workingwa.org. Please feel free to hit me up.
I mean, I think like the main thing is like don't hesitate to contact us if you have questions. And also I feel like a lot of this ordinance is really about as Dana said and Doris, like really just understanding your role as a domestic worker hiring entity, and also like really encouraging you all to have conversations with your workers. I mean, that's kind of the number one takeaway I always say to folks who contact our office is like, just have a conversation. You know, if you're worried about like breaks, or if you're worried about whether they're casual or not, or if you just engage in a conversation, a really open and honest conversation, and really try and understand what your role is in relation to this work. And so we're here to help, even if things feel really confusing and really legal. Like, I know a lot of our materials can seem like they're written for lawyers. You know, please don't hesitate to contact us, or Dana at Hand in Hand, or if you're a worker, Doris, you know, to try and break down some of the parts of the law that might be confusing, and we're here to help.